Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Vass Bednar and Robin Shaban. We're just talking about some of the practices of our online universe in the retail sector, I guess you can say. Robin, you were mentioning what the European Union is doing in terms of its regulatory structure and I guess making sure that these rules are actually maintained. What can you tell us about the United States? I understand that Senator Klobuchar maybe has a bill, or what's going on in the legislative and regulatory environment there?
Yeah, I'll speak a little bit to it and then pass it on to Vass
Sure.
because I think she might have a few more details than I do. But yeah, there has been more activity on, again, creating legislative frameworks that target digital platforms specifically.
Hmm.
And from what I'm understanding, that what's happening in the US is we don't have any legislation enacted at this point. I think this is still coming through their legislative process. But yeah, Vass, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, they do have one specific bill that would, when it comes to self-preferencing, that would define self-preferencing as an inherently anti-competitive act. So that would be a little bit different than the approach of self-preferencing that we saw in the Digital Markets Act, where it's based on the size of the firm, right? It's clearly a big tech practice. So it's interesting. It's interesting for Canada because, previously on the competition file, we've kind of hidden behind the factors of our geography and of our population to justify the comparatively different approach we've taken to competition. But in this digital economy, population and borders don't matter as much. So are we going to see a universe where it's okay to self-preference in some jurisdictions, but not okay in others? That would be difficult to rationalize, which is why we at least need to have the conversation in Canada.
Yeah, Vassi, I think you've made the point in your article that really there hasn't been a lot of action in Canada to regulate this area. Is that correct?
It's correct. And I think we often point to, I'm super guilty of this too. We point to our inaction as if that's some kind of secret policy cheat code to kind of spur us to action when we point to the reality that other jurisdictions are doing it. I don't know if that's necessarily the
Mm.
case, but I think Canada can really benefit from our being a slow mover, right? We've done a lot of jurisdictional scanning, we've done a lot of homework. So now's the time, kind of the vibe of, do you understand this joke? Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Sure, sure.
It's time for Canada to make the call, you
Right,
know?
right, right. Oh, that's a great analogy. And so now, Vass, sticking with you for a second, we now have this announced review of the Competition Act. So tell us a little bit about that. And you're obviously advocating banning self-preferencing as part of that review, as I understand it.
Well, I'm being a bit of a provocateur there. I think I'm great at asking questions and pointing to issues. Doesn't always mean I have the right regulatory answers. So, two things about this potential review of the Competition Act. One, every competition issue not going to be solved through one narrow piece of legislation. Canada should be thinking more about the all of government approach that's being exemplified by the Biden administration. There is a role here for a privacy lens on competition, for consumer protection. Robin and I have written about the potential for new provincial labor market legislation that would tackle gig platforms and monopsony. So let's use this moment to think big and think comprehensively and strategically about competition. When it comes to the review of the act, yes, it's overdue, but we can't rush it either. We need to get all kinds of voices involved. Robin's been writing a ton about this, not just economists, not just lawyers, small businesses, consumers, workers. Again, let's show the world that Canada does do competition reform differently.
Mhm.
And let's take an inclusive kind of compassionate lens as we look to build back better. Modernizing competition is a huge part of that.
Robin, what do you have to say about this?
Yeah, well, something that Vass and I and our colleague Anna talked about in the paper that we referenced earlier is that, as part of this reform and this review, it's important in this digital age to have competition legislation be really clear and upfront about what behaviors are a no-go and what behaviors are permissible. And this shows up, we're seeing this in legislation that's being passed elsewhere, right? Where there are specific activities and rules that are just unacceptable. And Canada's law isn't structured like this, and it creates significant barriers to enforcing the law. And this shows up again and again in our findings in our research study. So I think to really dig at the issue, we need to be rethinking what role competition plays in our society and how we want it to benefit all of us.
No, I think that's really important, and obviously, yeah, you want to have a holistic approach to the review of the legislation. It's not just about self-preferencing.